Hey, and welcome, msKIRAspeaks. Before we get started, I ask that you watch the videos till the end, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. We're back again for another episode of Raising Dion, Season 2, Episode 3, Issue number 203, Monster Problem. And the end of this episode, guys, wow. Just wow. But as the episode opens, we see Dion. He's with Jonathan and Esperanza, but he's kind of waiting for Brayden. As soon as Brayden comes, he goes off and leaves Jonathan and poor Esperanza hanging. He has so many questions. Brayden is a mind prober, so he's telling Dion, you could just think of the questions instead of asking me. Dion is so excited. So you can read thoughts and make yourself appear in my mind? Brayden tells him he can also make people do things, but that he doesn't think it works with powered people. So Dion asks him if he has a superhero name. He doesn't. And Dion, he's just so excited, like I said, to talk to another powered person that's around his age, because he does get to talk to Tevin, but Tevin's a little bit older. So Brayden makes him promise not to tell anyone about him being powered, not your mom or your nerd squad. We could use a Jedi like you, Dion tells him. Brayden says he's no Jedi. The Sith are way cooler. The Sith are the bad guys. Bad guys get the best lines, Brayden says. Child, Brayden be irking my nerves, I tell you. Dion wishes that they can hang out longer, but they've got to get to class. And Brayden says, we can do both. So we see that the levels at the sinkhole are spiking again. We see Mr. Gary and his bubbly neck as he makes his way into the sinkhole. He touches the flower and it's like he gets a jolt of like electricity, and you can just see it just like going all through him. Nicole, she's at a boxing gym when Kat comes in and they're discussing her ignoring Tevin because of Pat's return. She doesn't want Dion to relive the Pat trauma all over again, but Kat tells her, I think it's you that doesn't want to relive it. So she tells her how Kat tells Nicole how much Dion has grown with everything that he's been through in the last 2 years. And if Tevin weren't powered, there'd be no problem. So she encourages her to take the call. Triangle of Justice, they're in class and they're discussing that sinkhole. It was just flowers, Jonathan asked. Dion says, but they were glowing. Esperanza wants to know if he has any proof. A photo, perhaps? He says he got too spooked to take a picture, but he drew one. And Esperanza was like, with a face though, Dion. So Dion, he tries to catch Brayden's attention, and Esperanza's like, that's your new BFF over there? And he's like, no. So Brayden, he speaks to Dion through his mind. You want to hang out? Close your eyes. Now open them. They're on a field with lots of land. And Dion, he can still use his powers inside Brayden's mind. Brayden, because Dion's asking like, well, what else can you do? Brayden makes multiples of himself. It's a familiar place, and we see a young Brayden and his mom and his dad. Dion finds out that Brayden's dad had powers just like his, and he too got them from a trip to Iceland. All of a sudden, things start to go dark. It's Brayden's aunt. He screams and they're back in class. And if you remember from season 1, that aunt was a whole trip, thought there was a demon, a devil inside of him. And that was before the crooked man got hold of him. Tevin pays Nicole a visit at the gym and she apologizes, but he says there's no apology necessary. He understands. She's a single mom raising a little boy with superpowers. And she says, listen, he goes into the world and he sees all the possibilities. Well, all she sees is everything that could go wrong. She wants to do everything she can to protect him. So Tevin, he tells her a little story and he's trying to get her to understand that it takes a village. And she says she's all for a village, just not a powered one. So he tells her she has every right to be careful and he hopes that he can earn her trust. So we see David and he comes in, he tells Suzanne the results have come back for Pat, negative. He's clean, he tells her. She tells him, run it again. You don't know him. He tries to assure her if he gets out of line, he'll handle it. She doesn't want to hear any of that. As he's leaving, she says, David, run it again. So he goes right in to see Pat. He has a comic book for him, and he's done a deep dive into Pat's life. And he believes that Pat is there to help because he's like, you know, you could have ran. Everybody thought you were dead. You've caused so much confusion. Pat is still charged, and David lied to Suzanne. The crooked man is part of your DNA, David tells Pat. It will always be inside of you. They need to diagnose what's happening in the sinkhole and stop it. And David wants his help. Pat asks if Suzanne is on board, and David admits that he lied to her. Plausible deniability for Suzanne, and it keeps Fiona clean. It's audition time. And out in the audience, Dion asks Brayden if he's okay. Brayden explains that the lady or the voice or the figure or whatever you would like to call it in the dream was his aunt. She was awful. She was. He saw her die, he tells Dion. It was a little more than you seeing her die, Brayden. If I remember correctly, you had a hand in her death. So he tries to keep her out, but sometimes he can't. Next time, but Dion stops him. No, there will be no next time. He does not want to go back into Brayden's head. So Brayden wants to get out of there, and Dion's like, no, he has to stay and support Esperanza. So Brayden calls the whole thing lame, and he leaves. Kind of, sort of. So Esperanza, she's got a little bit of stage fright, and Dion tells her she's the best singer he knows. You can't miss your shot. And Jonathan tells her TOJ is there for her. So Kwame tells them to get out there and sell it, among other things, because my boy Kwame, he had a whole speech for these kids. They was like lines from Fame included, and the kids were like, what is going on? So the auditions began, and I am sorry to say some of these kids were awful. There were a few possibilities among them, and then we flash over and we see David bring Pat to the sinkhole. He's got those reinforcements with those, I think, CO2 guns. Pat is having feelings of remorse being there. So he gets down on the ground and he touches, and you can see the electrical charge as he's trying to get a feel for what's going on. He says he feels a rush of hate and that the crooked energy is using it. So Suzanne, she goes to see Pat, but of course he's missing. So she calls a code, whatever number, letter, color it is. Back at our auditions, they're still giving Esperanza a pep talk because she's up next. She freezes while she's on stage, and Kwame hits her with the next, but Dion comes out in her defense. You never messed up when you were a dancer, he asked him. That's how he remembers it. I had to laugh because Kwame is a whole trip. He tells him that Esperanza worked really hard on the song and that she's really good. Give her a chance. You got this, he tells her, and then he leaves the stage. So she tries it again, and this time she nails it. So everybody kind of comes onto the stage to congratulate her, and we see Brayden. He's backstage lurking, looking creepy. Crooked Man comes over and has a word with him. So he opens the doors where he sees Pat, and he starts to listen to Pat's thoughts. Will Dion ever forgive me, he asked. And I said to myself, uh-oh, this is about to be a whole problem. Brayden comes in, he tells Dion he needs to talk. He pulls him off to the side and he asks, who's Pat? How do you know that name? He's here at the sinkhole and he's thinking about you. So Dion teleports to the sinkhole, hands a-blazing. Pat tries to say a few words. You died, Dion says, and Pat tells him that his crooked energy doesn't control him anymore. Dion is growing more and more irritated by the minute, but Mom, she shows up just in the nick of time. She tells Pat to stay away, and Dion that they can work through this together. He's like, this is not a dream, this is real. Like, Dion, he's angry and he's crying, and finally Nicole's able to, get to him. She grabs him and she holds him tight, that mom hug. What were you thinking, Suzanne asked, because she pulls up in the Fiona van and hops out. And David's like, I had it all under control. She's like, put that thing back in the cell, and I want you in my office. Something else is down there, Pat yells. You swore to me he'd never leave that cell, Nicole says. And I was like, ooh, because Dion was standing right there. And I'm like, he's going to have a problem with her not telling him. Suzanne says she had no idea. You knew, Dion asked. And he's crying, and Nicole tries to apologize, and he tells her, you're not sorry, you're just sorry you got caught. And he runs off. Kat said he can handle it. Just talk to him. That would have been the better play. Now she's got a mess to clean up. So Brayden watches, and Pat is in that Bayona van driving past, but he doesn't quite know exactly what's going on. Back in the cell, David tells Pat, storms pass, he just has to write it out. David was looking for results and says he got some valuable insight from Pat. But essentially what happened is David used Pat. He used him all up and he spit him on out. He had no intentions of doing anything else with him other than leaving him down there and, you know, using the data that he got from him. At least that's my take on it. And I never trusted David the minute I saw him, because he wants to do something with that DNA. He wants to take it and use it for something else. And I'm not sure if it's good or evil. So Nicole, she goes to talk to Dion. You have every right to be mad. She should have told him about Pat. And she says sometimes she tries to protect him and she ends up doing the opposite. If Pat's alive, does that mean Dad is too? This is what Dion is asking his mom. And she says if Dad were here, she thinks that he'd come home to them. But, you know, they basically are talking about how energy never dies. And she says that they can keep him in their hearts, you know, forever and ever and ever. And he'll always be with them. So that night at the sinkhole, something is going on. Suzanne calls Nicole and tells her the energy is spiking again. Suzanne doesn't think it's Pat. And Nicole, she gets off the phone. She don't even want to talk about it. And Dion comes in and asks, what was that about? And she tells him, he's like, oh, cool. And she's like, what's going on? So he starts to stammering and making up stuff. And, you know, we could learn things. Just, you know, kids, just making it up. Finally, he reveals that he teleported to Bayona to find his phone that he didn't lose. And he heard Miss Suzanne talking about a weird secret down at the sinkhole. He went down there and he saw some really weird flowers that came alive. And then Pat shows up, Kat asks. So Nicole, she decides to take a trip on down to the sinkhole for her peace of mind, for her child's peace of mind. Suzanne gets a call, so she goes off. And Nicole, she walks over to the sinkhole and she kind of stoops down to the sinkhole and she calls herself talking to Pat. And she's like, I'm not afraid of monsters. And then she falls in the doggone sinkhole. She gets up, she dusts herself off, and she sees the glowing flowers. Suzanne yells for them to get a ladder. Nicole walks towards the flowers, and it looks like she's about to touch them. Whole time, I'm screaming at the TV, girl, we don't walk towards the glowing flowers. But there's an eerie figure breathing behind her. She turns around. It's Mr. Gary, who's turned into a full-blown monster. Energy levels are spiking like crazy. Get Nicole out of there now, Suzanne screams. So Nicole tries to climb the ladder, but he grabs her. She hits him and she starts climbing again. She gives him a kick, but we see that when she hit him, she got some of that green energy on her arm. So she gets to the top of the ladder. Gary just jumps one swoop out the sinkhole. Nicole, she, whacks him a couple of times. I can't remember what she was holding. And she gives him a few kicks before he finally runs away. We got a monster problem, she says. And that is where we end. Child, I told you the ending was a doozy. I told you it was a doozy. What an episode. Please put your thoughts down in the comments. Is Nicole going to be okay? Will she turn into a monster too? Or will she have superpowers? I cannot wait to watch episode 4. If you have made it this far, put that red monster looking emoji down in the comments. I may try to get a review for episode 4 up this weekend. If not, we'll just stick to the one a week, but keep your notifications on. I hope that you'll come back and join me. While you're here, please check out some of my other content. Thank you, thank you. And before you go, like, subscribe, and share. I appreciate you. Peace.